happy to take any questions.
As I look at the document you distributed earlier, and realize this is really a major overhaul of kind of foster care as we know it, and as we have known it. And I hear you to say that this also represents a long-term commitment by the administration to see this through soup to nuts.
Yes, I am determined to see this through. Let me make the obvious observation. We are doing this in the environment of Proposition 30 and in the environment of realignment, where placement costs have been transferred to the counties. Over time, we are going to have to find an equilibrium between the state's obligation to jumpstart activities that are new or enhanced or something, and then on the expectation that the county's decreased reliance on higher end, more expensive placement costs will even out it. We don't have a firm theorem or formula at this point, and we would invent one, but it would be, just that, an invention. And so at this point we're saying, let's sort of take this year by year, but this is an integrated whole. I would never say no word can be changed or no comma moved.
No, I get that. But in terms of the commitment to, so it makes me a little nervous when you say let's take it year by year, because once the train kind of leaves the station, and there's so many moving parts that are dependent upon each other to be successful, to create this really major transformation of the system. Yes. I guess I'm just asking generally that there's a commitment to see it through to fruition. And given that, what's your best guess on how long that could take? Because I looked at all these parts.
Different things will move at different paces, to be clear.
And it won't all roll out simultaneously.
Right. Probably the most dependent piece is that first piece about starting to expand foster home retention, recruitment, and support. As successfully as that moves, the rest can move with it fairly quickly. What we're projected in our sort of looking at it is much of it would be happening in a 3-year horizon. That isn't to say we would no longer have to have any lower level group homes after that period. And we have to be particularly sensitive to the fact that what may be accomplished in one part of the program, child welfare, may be more difficult in another, probation. Probation's reliance on group care as a lower level of care than locked facilities, that just may take some time for them to be in a comparable position. And we've said up front to everybody, we want to be sensitive to that. The sort of many of the youth who participated in the process also observed that, particularly for kids who are now 15, 16, 17, they are not interested in being moved out of their current placement. And we have to respect that fact and sort of commit ourselves that we're not going to create a new pipeline in, but recognize that relationships are built, circumstances are what they are, and we have to be respectful. Even though we don't ever want to take no for an answer at first, at the end of the day, we have to respect them.
Any questions of committee members? Senator Stone.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I think that reforming our foster care structure has been long overdue, and I applaud you for doing this. You mentioned the inferior pay of social workers in the state and its reflection on what we pay these agencies. And you mentioned that it would probably take a year before they started seeing any type of relief on that.
It will first. It will have to be in budget process, and so with starting the rate setting work literally tomorrow. My anticipation is that it's something we would be bringing forward in the administration through next year's budget is how to structure that rate. What part of that falls within the current local revenue fund, what part is outside of it. But that puts our FFA colleagues in the position that they've got a year ahead of them.
I think it's very clear the social workers in the state of California, they don't have any pay parity with what's being paid in counties. And that adjustment certainly has to happen if we're going to be retaining the very dedicated social workers that we have. And you mentioned that with respect to funding, you threw out the word Prop 30 out there. Right. And it made me nervous when you said that because that has a expiration date associated with it. And I haven't seen any efforts to extend Prop 30. Don't know if it will happen, won't happen. But if Prop 30 doesn't get extended, then how are we going to continue on with these programs? And especially, how is the county, what's the county's role going to be under the continuum of care? Or will the county's role remain the same?
The county's role, let me start with the end and work backwards. The county remains the placement supervision agency for children who are considered victims of abuse, neglect, maltreatment of any other sort. Within the construct of Proposition 30, the taxes that were approved at that point have a sunset date. However, the local revenue fund construction of realignment does not have an end date. Okay. So the dedicated portion of sales tax that goes to counties for their various accounts under the protection aspects continues on into the future. And the challenge that we and our colleagues, I mean, we're trying to be very upfront with everybody about what these challenges are. In an environment where we've realigned the program and said, here you have all the resources for it, then when we see the need to strengthen or improve, et cetera, there is a fine balancing between what state has to assume responsibility for and for how long versus where the county is. I think what I'm trying to say is we don't know exactly where the end point is, but I think there's willingness on all sides to be engaged in it and do it in good faith.
And can you just elaborate on what the state's new fiscal responsibility will be under the CCR?
Under Prop 30, if we increase county requirements based on a state action, the state owns that fiscally. If it's increased as a result of a federal action, the state and the counties share in it. Okay. If we have a new strategy that on the one hand has cost, but on the other hand has savings within the local revenue fund, there is an interaction. And because we're literally in year 2 or year 3 of this, we haven't gotten to that interaction before. We have to assume it's there, otherwise we're going to find ourselves frozen into a place where there can be no further policy development around child welfare. That is likely to occur. So I think everybody understands the need to be playing fair in this on both parts.
Thank you.
Finance.
John Silva with the Department of Finance. I would speak to Prop 30, but Director Lightbourne did a fantastic job. So any other questions, I'm glad to answer.
Thank you, appreciate that. Elia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ryan Woolsey with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We've reviewed all of the recommendations in the Department CCR report, and they do appear consistent to us with the mandate that the legislature gave to the Department in forming that work group. There are a lot of details yet to be worked out, perhaps most significantly the fiscal issues that the director mentioned, but those are going to have to be worked out over time. With respect to the specific budget proposal that's included in the governor's budget, we do think it makes sense to focus initial implementation of CCR on building capacity in home-based placements, which the proposal intends to do. However, there's a lot of details that remain to be determined on the part of the proposal that relates to county funding for retention and recruitment and outreach for foster parents. There's not very much detail at the moment about what types of activities would be engaged in, what kind of outcomes the state should expect, and how those outcomes would be measured. So while this does appear to be an idea that's worth considering, we think that there ought to be a little bit more clarity about those outcomes before the funding is approved. On the issue of the FFA social worker rate increase, want to reiterate what the director mentioned, which is that while the FFAs would have increased responsibilities under the CCR recommendations, this proposed rate increase is not connected with those new responsibilities, but rather is intended to help FFAs to meet current responsibilities. We think that this idea does merit the legislature's consideration, given that FFA rates have not been increased in some time and were actually reduced in 2009. We would only note that there's not a lot of detail behind why 15% is the right amount of an increase, if you will, and we think there's some room for the legislature to look at what an appropriate rate increase, should it choose to provide one, would be.
Thank you very much. We've got a second panel that'll be joining us on the continuum of care program. Allison Bendale from California Youth Connection, Susanna Niffen from the Alliance, Mr. Mecca, Welfare Directors Association, Jennifer Rodriguez, Youth Law Center. And then we'll ask the department to return after your 3 to 5 minute presentations each to respond to issues you've raised. Is that the order you'd like to go in, as I just read off? Allison, Susanna, Frank, and Jennifer? Does that work for you? Okay, we'll start with Ms. Bendale, California Youth Connection.
Hello, my name is Allison.
Hit the button. See the button? There you go.
Hi, my name is Allison Bendel with the California Youth Connection. I am a former foster youth, and I spent around 12 years in care from the ages of 5 to 17. And around my experiences in group home care, in those years, I also spent 2 to 2.5 years in between 2 group homes. And within that group home situation, I've experienced a lack of individualized care as what I see as a primary concern for foster youth. My time in the group homes ranged from 1 year and 1.5 years to another, in one age between 11 and 13, and another one between 13 and 14. Those were my junior high years and my high school years. And for foster youth, a lot of times, especially foster youth that end up in long-term care, there's a borderline of, are we supposed to be group home staff, come in for our shift and leave, or are we at that point needing to parent these children who have been through these tough experiences? I had group home staff who weren't allowed to give me a hug if I was crying, and I found out about the death of my grandfather from a stranger I met that day. Group homes don't parent, and maybe that's not their role, but spending long terms of time in group homes is probably not the intent. But we see that 55% of kids in group homes spend between 12 and 36 months in care, rather than short-term intensive care. And in both of the group homes that I lived in, I found that not one of the girls in those 2.5 years period in either group home had graduated the program in the whole time frame that I was there. There were several girls that left for mental health or juvenile hall, but no one graduated. No one went to a foster home. No one went home to their family. And I found that to be problematic. And in my group home in particular, at one point in time, there was 5 out of 6 girls, with the exception of me, on psychotropic medications. And there didn't seem to be much guidance. The children didn't see their actual, they didn't get to meet with the pharmacist. The pharmacist, meds were brought into a bubble pack into the group home. And the psychologist was hired by the group home for all 5 group homes. We've seen that in my situation, my experience, I've seen that psychotropic medications seem to be the primary, the primary intervention, the first thing they went to. And these kids are in a group home with different problems. We had kids who had anger issues, behavioral issues, emotional issues. We also had self-harmers, runaways, kids with all different lifestyles and problems, situations, and ways of being raised. And we found that it was kind of like a one-place catch-all misfits. That's really the only way to put it. And we were all in group care, but we needed individual care. We're all individuals, and how are we going to be treated as a group was very, very tough. Our girls in our homes didn't seem to ever fit in together, ever seem to grow together. And I think that may have been part of the problem. I failed out of my second group home, which was a level 14, which is the highest level of care in California. I was placed in that group home after failing a level 11 and had extreme behavioral needs because of extreme emotional needs that my foster parents couldn't fit. That ended up in a lot of arguing as a junior hire. And when I ended up in the group home, I caught myself in the midst of all this. Where was I going with that?
You talked about being at a level 14, transition directly from a level 11.
Yeah, because I failed and they said they couldn't find any other group homes willing to take me. Level 14 is the highest level of care in California, and I was there for behavioral and emotional needs. And I ended up failing out of the level 14 after months of objections to being there. And it's funny because they were saying that they didn't know where they were going to put me. No one was going to take me. But a friend of mine in high school had, her parents were very active in the church, and they decided that maybe they could give me a chance. So they became a NERFM, taking in this girl they knew really nothing about. And I found myself successful there just because I was loved, I was cared for. They gave me the help I need. I wasn't on psychotropic medications. I had therapy if I needed it, which I later declined. And I found myself going from failing high school in the group home to graduating a year and a half early and starting college. And I found myself successful because I had individual care, I had individual love, and I had a long-term home. People who could give me a hug if I was crying or needed help, rather than a staff who was told and ordered they couldn't go sit on your bed and talk to you. They couldn't relate to you on a personal level. And I think that's essentially what these kids may need if we're not going to use medication as a primary intervention. We need to find other ways to help these youth, and I don't think those needs are being met in group home care as a very wide standpoint in general.
Finished?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. Appreciate it.
Susanna Niffen, I'm the Associate Director of Child Welfare Policy at Children Now, and we've been involved in CCR from the very beginning, and we are 100% supportive of the idea that children should not be raised in institutions. They need to be raised in loving and caring home environments. We are very grateful to Director Lightbourne and the department for their commitment to this and their just going above and beyond what I've seen a State Department do in a long time on an issue like this. There's a coalition of us who have continued to meet on a very regular basis since the department's formal CCR meetings disbanded about a year ago. So I'm here speaking on behalf of that coalition, and hopefully they think I do a good job. We'll see. I think one thing that we as a coalition have really focused on since the formal meetings ended was this idea that are there going to be enough homes for these young people, and we need to make sure, given some of the shortages, that there are enough loving, caring, well-trained, prepared foster homes who can take in these young people. So we support the governor's investment in the counties and their retention and recruitment efforts. We think that's incredibly important. We also support the governor's investment in our foster family agencies and making sure that they are more able to provide intensive support to these families who take in these young people. There is a piece that we believe is missing, and that is a real focus on the actual families who are caring for these children. While the department seems to have really recognized that we need to build up supports and services, and we need to build up the counties, we need to build up the FFAs and some of those structures around the children, we feel that what's missing is a real focus on the actual families and the needs that they have. Our basic foster care rate and what we pay our families right now is very minimal. It really only covers food, shelter, clothing, and in the report when we set this rate, it says, this is only for a typical child. This does not cover the needs of a family who is caring for a child who has intensive needs or a child who has been through abuse, neglect, and trauma. The reason that the basic rate did not include that sort of a rate is because we have a specialized care system in California. Our specialized care system is designed to provide additional funding to support young people who have these more intensive needs. The problem that we have with our specialized care system in California from an advocacy perspective is that it varies from county to county. It varies from family to family. There's no standard assessment of a child's needs and how you access specialized care. So it's a little bit patchwork, and it does amazing things when it's working well, but it doesn't work for everyone. The major hole with our specialized care system is that it does not provide supports to families who are relatives, who are not federally eligible. It also does not provide additional support for families who work through FFAs. So that's a huge chunk of our foster care providers, and a huge chunk of our foster care providers who work with older youth who tend to have more intensive needs, which are the families who are coming out of group homes. I guess I just want to end with the idea that while the work that's going on is amazing, as a coalition, we would ask that the legislature also really consider the needs of the individual families. If we're going to ask these families to go to more meetings with the young people, to really provide intensive supervision, to stop them from self-harm and other things, that costs money to a family to be able to stay home from work.
Takes time.
To be able to stay home from work, to be able to, you know, adjust.